Rechler on what's next for commercial real estate. For our virtual attendees, please go back to the main agenda and select this session to join in. For those of you here at the Times Center, sit tight. This session will begin shortly. $1.5 trillion in commercial real estate mortgages are coming up for renewal in America alone. Some are predicting a 40% decline in the value of commercial real estate. How do we flip from challenge to opportunity? And what does that look like? Scott Rechler is the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of RXR. RXR is one of the largest owners, managers, and developers of real estate and infrastructure in the New York metropolitan region, with an aggregate gross asset value of $20.8 billion, comprising approximately of 26.5 million square feet of commercial properties. Please welcome Scott Rechler for a conversation with Chris Fair to explore what's next in commercial real estate.
Well, welcome to World City. I know this is your first time with us, Scott.
I'm thrilled to be here. Actually, that's a very pre-COVID picture of me, but I'll take it.
All right, we'll get it updated. So we heard from Ole, the architect, amazing visionary projects. Of course, you're coming at it from a different perspective as the investor, financer, and operator, as we heard of millions of square feet of space, billions of dollars invested. Maybe let's start off at the 50th floor, and we'll work our way down a little bit, but give us your take and your picture on what we've gone through and what's happening now with respect to commercial real estate in our cities.
Yeah, so like a lot of things with COVID, it accelerated a series of trends that were happening prior to COVID, and some of that Ole just spoke about in terms of the merger of how people live and how they work, and the changing dynamics there. And I think when you've now come through COVID, we're really going to see a real transformation of which cities are able to adapt to this, what I'll call new normal. And as the headline sort of said, this transition to the new normal is more turbulent than I think we would have anticipated, in the sense that you have to cross this chasm of this inflation that we went through, these high interest rates that we've gone through, the loans that are outstanding, and how buildings were valued in a world of low interest rates to a world of high interest rates, and cities having to adjust themselves to the way people work and live differently, whether that's hybrid work, where they commute, where that talent pool goes going forward. So I think this is really a moment, we say, to recalibrate for the new reality and reimagine how you're going to run your business and how you're going to address some of the opportunities and some of the challenges that cities and real estate are going to face coming out of COVID. And I think that certain cities and certain policies will enable you to accelerate some of these challenges and cross that chasm more effectively. And in certain cities that don't take certain policies and just sort of are less intentional on addressing this new reality, could face more turbulence, and it could be more challenging for those cities to thrive on the other side.
So I want to talk about policies in a moment, but let's kind of dive in a little bit on office and specifically. So probably one of the things we've talked about more than anything else has been return to work, or the lack of return to office, and its effect on office space. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing here in New York, and then how does that reflect trends more broadly with respect to commercial real estate elsewhere?
Yeah. So I think the return to office discussion has at least been resolved in New York and in most cities, that people return to work, but hybrid work is here to stay. And people's definition of hybrid work might be different, whether it's 3 days a week, 4 days a week, or flexibility depending on what someone needs to do relative to to manage a better work-life balance and be as productive as possible. And so that has seemed to resolve. So if you look at our portfolio, for example, post Labor Day, we're averaging over 70% to where we were in 2019. But when you look at Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, we're probably close to 90% where we were in 2019. So really, it's that Friday drop-off and that less people on Monday. So for office space, I think that works. Interestingly, when you travel around the world, as I have in Asia or Europe, it's much more people are in the workplace on a more regular basis and more consistent. So this has been, I think, a little bit more of a U.S. phenomenon, and Canada, I would say also, than maybe other parts of the world in terms of returning to the workplace. In any way you look at it, the challenge still is going to be the ecosystems, the urban ecosystems are going to be impacted by people being in the cities, in the city centers, less than they would have been before. And then, what's that mean in terms of running transit systems that have been designed to be, 5-day-a-week transit systems? What's that mean to our local businesses that don't have that lunch hour or, 5-day-a-week support, or restaurants that would need those supports? So those ecosystems are being challenged. And then to your point of how people work and where they want to work, people want to work in different types of buildings. And this, again, was something that was happening pre-COVID, but COVID accelerated, right? And the analogy I like to make is what happened with e-commerce and malls, right? When e-commerce happened, you could shop online. People would say, well, why would you ever go to a mall again? And for a period of time, everyone said, well, malls are going to be dead. And then eventually you saw certain malls were able to reimagine themselves and being convenient to get to, being a great experience, being an outing. And so it wasn't just about shopping, it was going to have an adventure. And I think the same thing is true about the workplace. To bring people back to the workplace, these need to be workplaces that are magnetic, that are energizing, that have encourage collaboration and communication between your team members, that are in neighborhoods that are easy to get to, and that the neighborhoods themselves have a lot of energy and activity around that. So there's been this bifurcation in office product for the buildings that actually can meet those objectives, in which case you're seeing more demand from companies that want to locate there, and office buildings that can't. And the ones that can't, it's really not about price. In many cases, about them becoming competitively obsolete, which then creates a whole nother problem, which is then you have these sort of zombie vacant buildings within our urban centers that we need to develop plans to reimagine them for some other use that helps activate those buildings and helps activate those communities.
So in your own firm, you did a project and kind of looking at all of your assets. I think it was called the Kodak project. And you sort of used that as an analog to say, okay, these buildings are digital, these buildings are film. What happens to the buildings that are film? What do you do with those assets that can't be upfit to attract the tenants that we're looking for?
So to Chris's point, I had charged our team last year of going through every property to say which building could be competitive in the 21st century post-COVID world and which ones wouldn't be film versus digital. And it was hard because you got to imagine, like, our teams look at every building like their own children. So I'm asking them to pick which is their favorite kids, which was difficult. So we had to get a lot more objective about our ratings in terms of what would qualify for that, and developed a whole series of different weightings around that as well. And fortunately, a lot of our buildings, obviously the vast majority of our buildings, fall into that digital world. The ones that fall into the film world, then you spend the time saying, okay, what is the alternative uses for those buildings? Irrespective of what the capital structure is, because you have to also have the right price to make that work, the right cost structure to make that work. But can you make it work as a mixed-use building where you can do multifamily in part of the building, office in part of the building, retail, maybe some self-storage, right? Some right mix of activities with that building that would create a higher and better use for the building itself from a value standpoint, and make it a building that can continue to be viable and well occupied, and for the community in which it sits, because it will create more activity. And I've always been a big fan of mixed-use buildings. I mean, even pre-COVID, we have a building in Rockefeller Center that we were negotiating actually with Airbnb to take the top of the building and build hotels, and we have a whole series of clubs and restaurants, and then we're gonna have the bottom as office and flexible office. And so the theory is, you have a building that's used generally 5 days a week. Can you now convert it so that it's a 24/7 building and have the amenities and activities energized for 24/7?
So what does the timeline look like? Sort of game this out for us a little bit as we think about transitioning these buildings. I mean, I assume takes many years. How do you see this kind of playing out here in New York, and what are some of the threats or risks as we cross that chasm, as you called it, and get to the other side in terms of transitioning a lot of these assets?
Yeah, it's hard, right? The first and most challenging part is people and owners and lenders have to coalesce around the new value, right? Because if, let's say, a building was worth $1,000 a foot, to really have a price on a per foot basis to be able to convert it, you need to be in the $200 to $300 a foot. So that's a hard shift, right? And there's going to be a lot of pain felt by people losing money along the way. But that's the reset that you have to get through. And then once we're at a point with this capitulation and a resetting of the values, then you got to look at the physical nature of the buildings and confirm it can be done. And then there's the regulatory process, right? In New York, some buildings are zoned, like some of ours, that you can actually do this without going in for a rezoning, but some aren't. And so if you have a regulatory challenge, that's going to make it difficult for someone to want to commit. So one way to solve that is to streamline the regulatory process, just to say all buildings that meet certain criteria could be converted to alternative uses other than office along the way, which would be obviously valuable. And then the last piece is, is the incentives, right? Can you create tax incentives to do it? And we've done this in New York, in Lower Manhattan, post 9/11. And it was a moment of time where we had to rise to the crisis, and there was policies put in place where they rezoned office buildings to be converted for office. They put in this tax incentives, and then the free market got to work. And what Lower Manhattan, which used to be literally a true 5-day a week, 9 to 5, mostly below ground community, is now this 24/7 live, work, play, vibrant downtown where you see baby carriages, parks, schools, real transformation. And I think those nodes in each of our urban centers are going to have to be reimagined in a similar fashion, where you have that live, work, play activity, if we're going to be able to support the infrastructure, support the real estate taxes and economic vitality of that urban ecosystem.
So as you talk about sort of this mixed use, live, work, play type environment, obviously that brings residential into mind. We've talked a lot about office and the effect of return to work or lack of on occupancy values, et cetera, but wanted to maybe touch on multifamily. You made a lot of investments during the pandemic. We were seeing people leaving New York, other cities. Tell us a little about your thought process of why you were investing in multifamily, and how do you think that plays out now when we look at interest rates where they are for real estate investors like yourselves, because obviously housing is critical, and bringing that body heat, that energy into these cities to make up for the lack of office workers.
So let me start by saying that our view of what makes a superstar city is the ones that are magnet for talent, right? When you have cities that are magnets for talent, where people want to come there, they want to live there, they want the culture, the architecture, the streetscapes, the opportunity, the professional opportunities that come with their diversity that comes in those cities, they become magnets. And New York City is that prime magnet for talent from almost any city around the world. And so when COVID hit and people were fleeing New York City, we had a high degree of confidence that people were going to come back. So to your point, we bought about $2 billion of multifamily that at the time was 80% occupied, and we bought it at a very good price. And now it's 98% occupied, and rents are higher than they were in 2019. So you want to bet on cities where you have the ability for that talent pool to come in. The challenge, though, is when you have cities, these superstar cities that attract that talent, eventually they become a victim of their own success. The affordability of housing, the affordability of quality of life, the affordability of schools, the congestion on the streets and subways. And so our sort of view is, for those cities to really be sustainable, you want to think about this as more like superstar regions, right? Where are those cities, and what's the connectivity to talent pools that surround that city? And if you can have transportation nodes back to those markets right outside those cities, those are great places to build housing that have the same quality of life, more affordability, and that's what we have been doing. We've been building what we call transit-oriented development around New York City and other parts around the country of these superstar cities. But the housing, it could be 50 to 30% less than what you pay in New York City, in Manhattan, but you're 30 minutes away from Midtown Manhattan, right? So you get the benefit of it without necessarily the cost of it. And that enables you to have a more sustainable city. And that's, whether that's London or Hong Kong or Tokyo, right? All this has to eventually happen. And think New York, as my point on talent, if you think about New York City itself, that's 8 million people. If you go to this transit-oriented development where you can think about being back into New York in 45 minutes by train, that's 20 million people, right? So it's 20 million people of talent that if you're a company that you want to locate someplace to access that talent, that's where you would access it. So when we think about multifamily, we're thinking about trying to create, to choose locations that like that, and then create settings that are also engaged in terms of this being a community where people want to live, recognizing that they also need to potentially work and have longer term relationships. And because of where the housing market is today, rental housing is by default many people's only choice, right? Because the affordability of homes, particularly as mortgage rates have gone up, have made it even more unaffordable. So they have to rent. So the renters that are in our properties, they look at this not as a transient stop, but as their home. And so you want to try to create that sense of community, that sense of engagement, programming and amenities that reflect to be to someone's home, and that this is their neighbor, not someone that's just renting the apartment next door.
So talk a little bit about the math behind multifamily. One of our concerns as we think about the effect of interest rates, you can maybe explain for us a little bit from the capital side in terms of how does this play out? We saw a lot of multifamily being built, developed around the country and other advanced economies. Of course, now the financing of that has changed. How does this play out in terms of the trends you'll see happening with some of these assets? And will we be able to build the housing that we need in these cities and regions based on where interest rates are now?
Yeah, so just as let me hit interest rates as a point, because interest rates, we've never in history have seen such a spike in interest rates in the short term that we've seen them over the last 12 months. And I sit on the New York Federal Reserve Board and watch this live happen, right? So there's byproducts and shocks to that no one anticipated, right? And this, not only do we have this spike, but we have this spike after almost 15 years of near zero interest rates. So it wasn't like we gradually went up, we went from this to this. And so any real estate, or frankly any business that was financed in that low interest rate regime that now needs to be refinanced and revalued in this normalized interest rate regime is going to be out of balance. And so that's going to be a challenge for office, that's going to be a challenge for logistics, self-storage, and that's going to be a challenge for, I think the next 2 to 3 years as we work our way through this digestion process. For housing itself, it's been even more of an exacerbation of the housing shortage because it had a double effect. Right, the first effect is that people bought homes at these really low mortgage rates. And in the US, we're fortunate enough that you can have these 30-year rates, and the rates don't go up when interest rates go up. So people have this average rate of 2-3%, and it stays there. But if you look at the mortgage rates, the new rates are like 7.5% today, right? So you're not selling your home into the market because you don't want to go trade from your 2% to 7.5%. So that's the lowest amount of supply on the market as a percentage in history right now. We went into this with already 6 million units undersupplied in homes coming out of the great financial crisis, which slowed down development of homes. So now this is going to exacerbate that because people who own homes aren't selling homes, and developers that would traditionally build homes can't afford for projects to pencil out because the cost of interest rates is so much higher that they're not getting construction financing. And to make that matters worse, lenders don't want to lend to real estate right now because they're all holding back and trying to reduce their real estate exposure. So we're in this credit crunch, and that you're going to have, as we come out of this credit crunch, a period of time that there's going to be less construction, and this housing crisis is going to be worse than going into it. So I think from an investor standpoint, if you could buy today, and there's going to be dislocation in pricing and there's going to be distress, anything that has to do with housing, that's a good place to invest. Because once we get through this period of dislocation, cross that chasm, as I like to say, and let's say that's 2 years from now, then the supply and demand are going to start falling back into track, and you're going to own something where there's more of a shortage, right? And we're doing that now in markets around the country, whether it's multifamily properties or, frankly, for single-family homes where we're buying, you know, if a home builder's building 500 units, we'll pre-buy 100 units of those homes and buy them at near cost because they need to get the project financed, and then we'll put them into the rental market today with a view that there's going to be a lack of supply in the future. So it's probably one of the, as an investment theme, probably one of the best investment themes. But in terms of the thinking about, you know, affordability of housing, it's unfortunately going to make this a more challenging issue for us as a country.
No question. And you're based here in New York. A lot of your holdings are in New York, but you've started investing in other cities, regional basis. What are the trends that you see? I mean, we talk a lot about the sort of rise of the rest. If people are able to work more remotely, or we've talked about reindustrialization and economic activity spreading around the country. How does this play out in your mind, and where are you being opportunistic as you look at different regions and cities? So,
as I said earlier, COVID is an accelerant, and so a lot of our clients pre-COVID, and I say clients, corporate clients, we're talking about thinking about a more distributed footprint to attract their workforce. So where if we're only located in New York, well, New York's good, but you know there's other spots around the country, whether that's North Carolina or Dallas or Denver or Phoenix, where there is that talent pool. So they were thinking about spreading around into those other marketplaces. COVID accelerated that as there was this migration into these other locations. And so that's an area that we're now been investing in and doing most of our investing in those other markets right now. And we target markets that we say have eds, meds, and well-leds. Good education systems, good healthcare systems, which for us is a proxy for having a magnet for talent. And well-led, which is leadership that's investing in infrastructure, investing in quality of life, investing in economic opportunity to ensure that's going to be sustainable. And then even within those superstar cities, as I call them, we're still taking the same approach of being on that outer ring of the city, connected transit back to the city, and having that sort of competitive advantage of a lower price point, lower price cost of living in that area, but proximity to the main city itself. And so, and I think that's just going to be the way this plays out. Now, the other lens you want to put on this, or filter that you want to put on this, and particularly today, is what are the extreme weather conditions and extreme political conditions that could impact any of those cities, right? And so that's something else that we focus on a lot relative to long-term sustainable, value sustainability as well as demand.
So as you think about the future, whether it's multifamily, office, you talked about sort of policy changes, things that we need. Are we sitting here like waiting for government to create the policies we need, or what role do we play? A lot of us here come from architecture, design, urban planning. What's the role that placemakers may have in crossing this chasm from your perspective as an investor and operator of these buildings?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that we all have a responsibility, right? That there's too often we, as either business leaders, civic leaders, community leaders, we look to our elected officials and blame them for the success or failures, when in reality, we all are incumbent ourselves, right? We all have to do our part to encourage that change. And frankly, generally as a group, and including myself in this, we're not great at advocating for change and providing air cover or policy ideas for these leaders to follow. I mean, there's some obvious ones, that come to mind, right? When you think about, we're just in our conversation, right? We have a housing shortage on one hand, and on the other hand, we have a situation where we have all these obsolete office buildings. So you would think any policy that helps expedite the conversion of obsolete product to housing, as much housing as we can, in every price point as we can, would be a good thing, right? I mean, the same thing this morning. I was with the mayor, and he was talking about, the asylum seeker and migrant issue that we have. And then last week I was in a board meeting at the Fed, and they're talking about how we have this job shortage, particularly hospitality and service. Well, job shortage, migrants coming here, right? We should find a way to bring them together, right? So we have these problems, but we should find a way to turn these lemons into lemonades, right? And I think some of these policies make a lot of sense. It's just very hard to force it. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is that government is very good at responding to a crisis, but not very good at proactively trying to take steps to prevent the crisis, because it takes more political risk and political will to take those proactive steps. And so the more that we can encourage those types of steps and be there to support the ones that have the courage to put them forward and see them through, I think then we will be better as a community at large.
So last question, I think I wish we had more time, but what keeps you up at night as you think about the future of cities, the investment portfolio, you're in multifamily, office? It sounds like you've addressed a lot of these, how you will handle certain assets. What do you see as kind of the biggest risk that we should be concerned about?
I think the thing that keeps me up at night, and I think probably a lot of us I'm speaking for, right, is that we've lived through, and we continue to live through, so much unpredictable uncertainty, right? Every time we think we solve a problem, but something else happens. And whether that was obviously COVID, and then there's extreme weather events at levels and speeds that we've not seen historically, the political issues that happen, the war in Europe, the prices of fuel, now we obviously this whole migrant issue, asylum. So there's always something. So what really keeps me up at night is not knowing what the next thing might be, right? And having to really think about being nimble, keeping your eyes wide open, and recognizing that what was true yesterday or true today is not likely to be true tomorrow. So you need to rethink your plan about how you're going to deal with things going forward.
Well, uncertain times, so buckle up.
Right.
Well, thanks so much, Scott, for joining us.
Thanks, Chris.
Give me join in a round of applause.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott. Coming up next, our first Ignite Talk of the day with Eric Clement, Senior VP Fund Manager at Social Impact and Sustainability Investments at RXR, to answer the question, is the system broken? For our virtual attendees, please go back to the main agenda and select this session to join in. For those of you here at the Time Center, sit tight. Eric will be on stage in a moment.